Usually we begin the story of Mary at that point, but what the Quran does that's quite beautiful is give us this idea that Mary actually was a figure important in her own right. And gives us the elucidation of a journey that leads to the birth of Prophet Isa. From her story, her voice, her own mother, in fact, I don't know if you know the story of Maryam's own mother, we can map three elements of how we form a daily peace. The Quran is a book, as it describes itself. It is also a set of stories that engender us with huda. So the Quran describes the Quran as huda, a book of guidance also. And this guidance is for everyday living. A lot of times in our communities, I'm Kashmiri, what we'll do is we'll wrap the Quran and put it up on a shelf far away where no one can reach it as a sign of respect. So removal from our everyday lives is sometimes a sign of our cultural respect. But one of the things when the Quran says that it's a book of huda is daily guidance. It means taking it off the shelf, taking it out of all the beautiful wrapping that we put around it and a lot of us that grew up in that scenario understand, and opening it. Not just unwrapping it, but opening the Quran itself. So one of the things the three elements that I want to talk about from the story of Surah Maryam, and I'm going to keep it short today because I think a lot of people we have other activities and things to go to. But the story of there are three elements. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is so many times, Muslims in America in particular, spend all our time defending Islam as a religion that isn't violent. And what I wanted to talk about today is actually, not only is the Quran a book of guidance, but the tradition is a tradition that teaches us how to do daily peacemaking. So today we're going to look not just at the story of Maryam or Mary, but we're also going to look at how we utilize the Quran as a guidance from being peacemakers on earth. So the first element is wholeness. This idea that the human condition, what we're looking to establish is this idea of wholeness. So the Quran tells us, and remember when the angel said, "Oh Maryam, Mary, verily Allah has chosen you, purified you, and chosen you above the women of the world." So what's beautiful about this ayah from the Quran is that wholeness is not in the eyes of someone else. My definition of being a full human being doesn't rest on what you think of me or what I think of you. From where does it come? Who chooses us to be recognized as human beings that are whole? It's actually the recognition from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Maryam appears with fault. She appears with fault. And she comes into the community where people reject her. They say, "No, we don't want you in our community. You've come to us as a mother with a child without an identifiable father." And imagine the time that she's in. This is thousands of years ago. The morality and the code that she is seen to be violating is massive. So she's rejected openly. But what's beautiful is even in that moment when other human eyes would see her as the greatest fault, who elevates her? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the devotion to God makes her a whole. And mentioned in the book, Maryam, when she withdrew from her family to a place facing the east, she placed a screen from them, and then we sent to her our angel Jibreel, and he appeared before her in the form of a man, full human form. She said, "I seek refuge with the most beneficent from you, if you do fear him." The angel said, "I am only a messenger from your Lord to announce to you the gift of a righteous son." She said, and you can imagine her anxiety and her fear. She says, "How can I have a son when no man has touched me, nor I have been unchaste?" The angel said, "So it will be, your Lord says, that it is easy for me, and to appoint him as a sign to mankind and a mercy from God. And it is a matter decreed by Allah." So what's beautiful about this ayah is I wanted to tell you one of the things that, one of the parallels of Prophet Isa, Jesus, is he is mentioned as a rahmah, as a mercy to humankind. Some of you who were here for the lecture last week, who else was described as a mercy to all of humankind? Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's beautiful that this story is told this way. So a lot of times we think that it's the outward piety that matters, that how we look, how we are is what matters. And it really, the cloaking of ourselves is what is important in the eyes of God. When we have the internalized voices of others who seek to interpret our wholeness, we do damage to ourselves. When we believe about what others say about us and how we treat ourselves. And ultimately, if we're able to harm ourselves, we are also able to harm others. Rahmah, or mercy, is not only a manifestation of how we treat others, it's how we should treat ourselves. So violence to the self is the first stage of declining empathy. We live in a time where there's so little empathy for each other that we literally don't feel pain anymore. I don't know if you've looked at some of the studies on sociology. Many of us don't feel pain because we experience or see so much around us. Or we have young children who are doing things to their bodies in dealing with issues of pain because we live in a time where wholeness, many of us are walking around broken, deeply broken, with all of the pain in our society. So rahmah, it's not violence against each other, but it's actually also violence against ourselves. Al-Ghazali said, Imam Al-Ghazali said, to show empathy to someone else, you have to feel their pain. So for me to feel or understand what you're going through, I have to feel your pain. We live in a time of numbness. Does everyone know what that means? We live in a time where if someone does something on the street, there are videos on YouTube, you can go watch them, where someone's being attacked, nobody stops them. We live in a time where Prophet Muhammad said the way that we show strength is not to dominate someone else, but to hold your anger back. So we live in a time where the definition of strength is not to show vulnerability and to take care of each other, but we live in a time where the remarks made in our political scape or other places are actually really attacks on one another. So this is a time where we learn the story of Maryam and we begin to understand that who we need to look to for our definition of self is not the stories that other people tell about us. And in a time of Islamophobia, when I work with young people, I say the most dangerous stories are the stories you accept to be true about yourself. So I was talking earlier about when people say Islam is a violent religion. Muslims are like this, Muslims are like that. You know, it doesn't worry me about what other people think about us, but it often worries me about what we think about ourselves. Do you know what I mean? How much of what's happening out in the world have we internalized into our own self-definition? How much of what is said about us becomes the story of who you are? Because the most dangerous stories are not the ones that others think about us, but the ones we believe to be true about ourselves. And that's why it's so important to engage the stories from the Quran. And so one of the beautiful things about this story that I love about Maryam is that she stood up for righteousness when everybody else was saying you are wrong. And that is the mark of all of the great leaders of our tradition. Prophet Muhammad stood up when no one else would believe in him. So part of our goal as Muslims isn't to always be the popular one. You may not be the one that's liked right away. Inshallah, as you know with Maryam's story, she eventually was able to give birth to a prophet that became a leader of nations in his example and in his story. So my point here is, though, in the beginning, standing up and understanding how important wholeness is, and that wholeness is not defined by the remarks that other people make about us, but most of all, pay attention to what you think about yourself. What do you think about your definition of self as a Muslim when all you're hearing is negative stories? How are you reconnecting to the Quran? Because what I think is profound is the only time I hear Quran in the media is when it's utilized and weaponized. That the verses of the Quran become weapons, right? Whether they're by use at those that advocate violence or those that advocate violence against Muslims. So we have to remember that this tradition has depth, and that this tradition has tools to give us this healing and this wholeness. So the first idea from Surah Maryam, as well as Al Imran and other parts of the Quran, is this idea that the human definition of wholeness is how we maintain a relationship with God and a definition and a view of ourselves as individuals that have something to contribute to society. No matter what is said about us, no matter what are the stories that are out in the community, about our community. The second is healing. And one of the beautiful things that I was thinking about in this story is that a lot of times we get worried that if I stand up as a Muslim, if I do something in public, I will lose resources. So after 9/11, when I graduated from law school, a lot of people were telling women who were interviewing, you should remove the hijab because you won't get a job, right? Or maybe it's not good to pray in public. Maybe you shouldn't be showing your religious tradition because you may lose something. And you know what was so profound about Maryam? She demonstrated the second point that I wanted to talk about, the ethics, is this healing. That if you have a direct connection with God, guess who provides? Allah. And what happens? Your dependence is not on other people anymore. So around Mary's birth, we have the story. We don't know the name of her mother, but this is what her mother, so her Lord accepted her with good acceptance. This is how she was raised. He made her grow in a good manner and put her under the care of Zechariah, who was another prophet. Every time he entered the mihrab or the praying space to visit her, he found her supplied with sustenance. So around Maryam there was always food. He said, Maryam, where have you got this? She said, this is from Allah. So Allah provides sustenance who He wills without limit. So we live in a time when we have a mentality of scarcity. That, oh, being a Muslim is so difficult. Being a Muslim is such a cost. But one of the beautiful things about the story of Maryam is when you remove the dependence on other people, Allah provides. God provides no matter what. So Maryam had a mentality of abundance in God's ability to provide. In our times, we are taught to be in moments, we are taught, for instance, in Ramadan to understand when people have lesser means. It is part of our healing to know that after difficulty comes ease. Mal usri yusra. With difficulty comes ease. It is a reminder, that's another ayah of the Quran. It is our reminder that very few things are necessary. What are the things that are necessary in life? Are they clothes that bring us status? Are they a house that brings us status? One of the beautiful things about the story of Maryam is we realize those are not the necessities in life. So the few things that are necessary, a conversation and relationship with Allah, that is a necessity. If you have every material thing in the world but you don't have that relationship, you don't even enjoy those gifts. So a conversation and a relationship with Allah. And that's what I really want to bring into this. The beautiful thing about the story is Maryam is in a conversation and a relationship with God. She's speaking and talking to God. So there's not one person in this room for whom you cannot also have that direct relationship with God, right? None of us is privileged to have more of that than the other. So a relationship with the divine. We need a few things to maintain this relationship with the divine. One of the things we learn from the story of Maryam is solitude for contemplation that Maryam had in her growing up. And so it's also important to be together, but also as Maryam did, to withdraw at times. Who else withdrew and went into solitude? Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was known for going to the cave to withdraw. So it's important to spend time away from the world and the worldly things around us. So Maryam teaches us that also. So that's something that's very important. Another thing that's important is an open heart for that conversation with the divine. So having an open heart for that conversation, here someone appears to her, an angel appears to her, and she could have rejected him. She could have said, "Who are you? I have no interest in speaking with you." But she had an open heart for that conversation. And then what else is important? It is a community to learn from and support in that journey. So it's important that healing as a Muslim is done individually, but it's done together. Every ritual of Islam has an individual component and it has a component in jama'ah, in groups. We are a religious tradition built on community. It's probably possible to be a Muslim on a desert island all by yourself, but the aspect of Islam of being in community is very important. So one of the beautiful things about our tradition is it has both elements. Some traditions withdraw people from society and others push people together. We have both of these elements happening. So sometimes we take time to be alone and sometimes we take time to be with one another in prayer and in learning. So communal and relational healing are so important. And one thing that Mary's story illustrates us is the ethic of care that Zechariah, her uncle, had for her too. So he went in to check on her. She's alone. She's doing deep worship of Allah, but he went in to check on her. So when we leave this space, part of our healing, the usra yusra, after difficulty comes ease. It's not just Allah that gives us the ease, it's the ease we give one another. Are we checking in on each other? Are we building community with one another? Are we seeking to be healers and peacemakers with one another? As a Muslim, one of the things we are obligated to do is to be peacemakers with one another. And one of the major places to start, and I've been thinking about this in my own context, is with our own families. That so often when the home is a home that has such difficulty and pain, we need to begin to think about peacemaking within these places. So in Isa's birth, we also learn about healing. So she conceived him, and this is from the Quran, she withdrew to a far place. And she said, and the pains of childhood drove her to the trunk of a date palm. She said, as any mother who's gone through childbirth would say, "Would that I had died before this and had been forgotten and out of sight." Then a call came from her below, "Grieve not, your Lord has provided a water stream under you. Shake the trunk of the date palm towards you. It will let fall fresh ripe dates towards you. So eat and drink and be glad. And if you see any human being, say, verily, I have vowed a fast unto the most beneficent, so I shall not speak to any human being this day." So out of these verses, one mentally has this picture of Maryam she's driven out of her community. She's withdrawn. And yet in that moment, she draws on healing. So the other part of healing is that it's physical. It's around our body. So when we are dealing with stress, in times of Islamophobia, of racism, we internalize that pain where? It's not just the pain here. It's the pain in our body. So we need to also be taking time, and this is something I need to think about myself, is this is not the time to be the least healthy. This is not the time to eat the worst. This is not the time to do self-destructive behaviors. This is actually the time to focus most on our health. Because the amount of stress we deal with in society, this is the time that the body needs to be taken care of, as illustrated in this story. So what happens? Maryam, she takes her son, then the Quran tells us, then she brought him the baby to her people, carrying him. They said, "Oh, Maryam, indeed you have brought a thing which is greatly evil, O sister of Haran. Your father was not a bad man, nor was your mother an unchaste woman." Remember, she's taken a vow not to speak. So she points to the baby, and they say, "How can we talk to one in the cradle?" And we know that what he answered is he spoke for himself, he spoke as a witness on behalf of his mother, and he spoke about the mission that he would have on this earth. The other beautiful thing about this story is who is speaking on behalf of a woman who has been cast out? A baby. And so if a baby who is born, Allah knows how many weeks, months, maybe even hours, has the courage to speak on behalf of someone who's been cast out, how come you and I can't have that courage, right? How come you and I don't have the courage to stand up? This is one of the other beautiful miracles of Prophet Isa, alayhi salam, is that he spoke as a child. And a lot of the beautiful miracles of Prophet Isa, they're not just stories that are fun to tell or nice to tell. There's a lesson in it. So the lesson is that if a baby can speak, as the hadith says, a good word to oppressors, a true word, a right word, then how is it that if these babies are speaking, you and I as an adults are afraid to speak, right? So it's not just a miracle, but it's a lesson. So the other beautiful thing, the last thing I wanted to talk about was hope. And this ethic of hope. So we had the ethic of wholeness and healing, and now we talk about hope. So one of the stories that we don't often know or talk about is the story of Mary's birth herself. So the Quran tells us, when the wife of Imran, as we know her mother, said, "Oh my Lord, I have vowed to you what is in my womb, my child to be dedicated to your services. So accept this as my vow from me. Verily all hear the all-knowing." Then when she delivered, she said, so she delivered, she's vowing whatever is in her womb. Whatever I have in my womb is for your service, Ya Allah. So when she delivered, she said, "Oh my Lord, I have delivered a female child." So what was she probably expecting? A boy, right? So she delivers a female child. And Allah knew better what she delivered. So, "Oh my Lord, I have delivered a female child, and Allah knew better what she delivered. And the male is not like the female, and I have named her Maryam. And I seek refuge with you for her and for her offspring from Shaitan the outcast." So what's beautiful here is, what she did is she still dedicated her child to Allah. She still dedicated her child to service. Because what would have been acceptable in that time in society is, if it was a girl, what would you have done? She wouldn't have been put up for learning. She wouldn't have been put in the holy spaces. So what's beautiful is, she did something. Here's a daughter of a woman who defied convention. But where did she learn this? Where did Maryam learn to stand up to convention that was often putting women out in these spaces? She learned from her own mother, right? So her mother says, "Whatever's in my womb, I dedicate." She was a student of Zechariah, so knowledge was also important. So socially, she was seen as deficient for this holy role. This role that she ended up playing, she was seen as deficient. But her mother had an ethic of hope that her promise could be fulfilled by a girl. When she made the vow to Allah and says, "Whatever is in my womb, I dedicate to Allah," she still believed that a daughter could fulfill that hope, and that her daughter could live up to this promise. So Allah accepted her Maryam with good acceptance, the Quran tells us. So it's incredible, because this belief in God engenders in us the sense of hope. And we need to have hope these days. And I often talk about in my work, we need to produce hope. Hope is not something that just exists. It's something we have to produce together and individually. So this understanding that Maryam's mother had instilled in her the hope that her daughter would be able to dedicate her life to God. So think about this also in our communities. Do we have hope that our young Muslim girls will also live up to the examples? Do we have hope? Do we give them hope? Or do we hold their gender against them and say, "No, you can't get knowledge. No, you won't be as good as so-and-so." Again, it's the stories that we believe about ourselves, because it's that self-image. If we continue to tell someone as a child, "You won't succeed, you won't get anywhere, you are not deserving of the same resources as a male child," they will internalize that. And that becomes part of the way that they view themselves in the world. So I just wanted to share that story, because I think one of the important aspects of Maryam is who were the people that brought her to be who she was. So she was ready to be elevated by Allah above all women. It wasn't that she was just the vessel for Isa alayhi salam. It wasn't that she was just a person who gave birth to Isa, but she has all these steps that brought her to the point and these lessons. So we know that Isa spoke on her behalf when she had the fast of the speech. So the hope manifests, the hope that we should also have is that it's not just individually that I will stand up for myself, but we stand up for others. It is not that Mary was passive, but she had a keen sense of God's sense of provision and faced the most heinous accusations and crowd with a belief that she would come through it. And so Allah sent her the resources, He sent her the physical healing, and He sent her a son who spoke on her behalf. So again, it's that individual healing, but it's also that she was in community. And so out of these three ethics, one of the things I also want to share with you, one of the beauties of this tradition is that the way we do our work, the way that we engage in our tradition is that it is a behavioral system. It is something that influences behavior. Knowledge without an influence on our behavior is useless, right? If you read something and it doesn't influence you, then what have you learned? So as you read these stories of the prophets and you read the story of Maryam, what is it that in your life becomes something that you can manifest? How in your life do you pull back on the vision of yourself that is harming yourself? What is it about yourself that you believe that is holding you back? What is it in your vision of your community that you are playing a role of a peacemaker or of a troublemaker? What is it in our behavior, in our families, that helps us to either be a healer or a herder? What is it in the vision of what we're trying to achieve in life? What are you trying to get out of this life? What am I trying to get out of this life? What am I envisioning? If my vision includes only the material aspect, if I can only think about the kind of car I want, I found out my 9-year-old wants a Bugatti. I don't even know what that is, but she apparently knows. But if our vision includes only the material aspects of life, then we're not a whole person, right? And we live in a culture and a time that values material gain and says those who have money have higher value than those who don't. If you want to immigrate here, you have to be able to prove how much money you can make for this country, right? And you know what is a part of all of that that we don't think about when we're emphasizing the material is it's also anti-intellectual. Because there's something about the production of knowledge that it's not about money. When you are teaching and learning, it is about the production of knowledge. You're not making a good, you're not making a home, but you're building, as hadith tell us, sadaqa jariyah, the kind of charity that goes on for generations, right? So it's really important that as we are in this time and in this place to think about our ethics and our values. And so often, I think that we are in a time and a place when we talk about our tradition, we are often trying to fit into what is being said about us, or we're very defensive. So my encouragement to you and to me as well is to think about what is the uniquely Muslim gift that I bring to the table? What do I learn from the story of Maryam and Isa that enriches the wider society? Because if Isa is a rahmah and Prophet Muhammad is a rahmah, a mercy to all of humankind, why are you and I not a mercy to all of humankind? So that when we walk in a room, it shouldn't be that, as I talk about in my work, that someone is just a peacemaker, but we're actually peace producers. So people want to be around you or me because we build connections and love. And so it's not about talking about Islam, it's about embodying and being such that your character speaks the beauty of healing, hope, and wholeness, as the character of Maryam, Isa, the mother of Isa, speaks to us. So thank you for your time today. I think we'll probably end at this point. But I want you to take with you, inshallah, think about in your life, what are the changes you can make to foster healing, hope, and wholeness, inshallah?
Can I add something?
Oh, please, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, the Quran says, is care or fear only Allah. Don't fear others. So you can go in, any place.
I'm here. I will.
So is care of Allah, the fear of Allah, not the people.
I think that's a really important point, because I think as you tell the story of Maryam, if this happened to someone else, they would have been so afraid that they wouldn't have believed that hope is based on not fearing other people. I think you make a really good point there. This idea of being hopeful is tied to Iman, or our belief in God. So if our belief in God, if we believe Allah will provide, then it gives us the tools to be hopeful, to get through many things. But I just want to point out, it takes work. Everyday kind of work, and we have to encourage one another. Sometimes we just tell kids, or we tell other people, you should have a strong faith, but that faith takes development, it takes energy, it takes encouraging each other, checking in with each other, and it takes vulnerability. Sometimes it's not strong, sometimes it's challenged, sometimes we're falling apart, sometimes we're dealing with a situation that's breaking us, right? So we need to know ourselves. Maryam was so self-aware. We need to know ourselves to know when we have to seek help. I think that's a very good point, especially in this time. Sometimes we're afraid to seek out help until it's too late. Was this all being videoed?
Yes. Why? You have a problem with that? it's on our Facebook, so.
Okay, well, Assalamu alaikum Facebook.
All right.
Any other questions?
You'll give it to us where? Okay.
So, just to kind of end here, and also, this is a story of hope for Muslim women, right? Because so many times Muslim women are talked about in ways we are talked about without getting to tell our story. So I really want to encourage Muslim women who are in multiple spaces. So many of us are doing such amazing and good work. And I think we need to begin to understand that this story of Maryam and her capacity to be in a situation in which she was dealing with such difficulty, it's not to be afraid to tell our story and not to be afraid to share our stories. So she gives us hope. And so I wanted to point that out too. I think for those of us that are Muslim women, we live under the pressure of Islamophobia, but many of us, whether we wear hijab or don't wear hijab, are often targeted in particular. And so I think this is a story that gives us not just pride in our tradition, but it gives us hope that we are participants in this community, participants in this tradition, and as we see with the story of Maryam, producers of knowledge in this tradition as well. So I encourage all of us, especially those of us that are raising daughters, to give them the examples of women like Maryam, and women from the past, but also women amongst us right now. So they see role models who give them the strength to understand that their tradition is one in which they have a full capacity to become participants as well as producers of knowledge. And I just wanted to say that I think that's part of this story. So that's why we have to not begin the story of Maryam with the birth of Jesus, but go back and uncover how does a person get to the point that they're elevated above all other people. It took the preparation of a whole community to produce this person who was able to stand up and build a whole sense of how to engage. And I think that's really important for those of us that are Muslim women and for those of us that are raising Muslim daughters to know that this tradition is one in which they can find strength, participation, voice, as well as examples. So shukran jazakumullah, and thank you very much.